The stars looked different through the observation deck of the Harmony's edge. Kang. Minho pressed his face closer to the thick glass window and watched the distant sun grow, larger as their ship moved deeper into the Sol system. This was his first mission as a junior xenobiologist for the Galactic Council, and his hands trembled slightly with excitement. Beautiful, isn't it? Dr. Yoon Hana's voice came from behind him. She was his supervisor, a seasoned researcher who had studied dozens of species across the galaxy. Her blue skin had the telltale markings of someone who had spent years in deep space, and her four eyes moved independently as she scanned the datapad in her hands. I never imagined their star would be so bright, Minho replied, turning away from the window. The reports made it sound like a standard G-type system. Hana smiled, showing her rows of small, pointed teeth. Every system is standard until you see it with your own eyes. That's why we do field research instead of relying on computer models. She gestured for him to follow her toward the briefing room. Come. We have much to discuss before we reach Earth orbit. The briefing room was small but comfortable, with holographic displays showing detailed information about their destination. Images of blue oceans and green continents rotated slowly in the center of the room. Minho had studied these images for months during his preparation, but seeing them now felt different somehow. Tell me what you know about humanity, Hana said as they took their seats. Minho straightened up, eager to show his preparation. Humans are a bipedal species that evolved on the third planet of the Sol system. They achieved spaceflight approximately 100 of their years ago, and have been expanding throughout their local system ever since. They recently applied for preliminary membership in the Galactic Council after demonstrating acceptable technological advancement. And what about their military capabilities? That's why we're here, Minho said, consulting his notes. Humans have developed something they call civilized conflict. It's a form of warfare that follows strict ethical guidelines and minimizes casualties. The Council is considering using their methods as a template for other developing species. Hana nodded approvingly. The footage they submitted was impressive. Clean engagements, minimal collateral damage, swift resolutions. If their methods are as effective as they appear, we could revolutionize how conflicts are handled across the galaxy. The main display changed to show video clips from recent human military exercises. Soldiers in neat uniforms moved with precise coordination. Vehicles advanced in perfect formations. When weapons were fired, they struck their targets with surgical accuracy, disabling rather than destroying. The battles looked more like elaborate dances than actual combat. Look at this efficiency. Hana pointed to one clip where human forces surrounded an enemy position. They neutralized the threat in less than 6 hours with only 12 casualties total. Compare that to the Zephyrian conflicts we studied last year, where similar engagements lasted weeks and killed thousands. Minho watched the footage with growing admiration. The humans moved like they had been born for this type of warfare. Every action was calculated. Every decision seemed to minimize harm while achieving objectives. It was beautiful in its restraint. Their casualty reports are remarkable, he said, scrolling through the data. Even in their largest recent conflicts, deaths are counted in hundreds rather than thousands. How do they maintain such discipline? That's what we're here to find out, Hana replied. If we can understand their methods and teach them to other species, we might finally achieve the Council's dream of truly civilized warfare across the galaxy. As their ship continued toward Earth, Minho spent hours reviewing the human military files. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. He found himself wondering about the gaps in their historical records. The files showed detailed information about recent conflicts but very little about older ones. Dr. Hana, he said during their evening meal, I noticed something odd in the human archives. There are significant gaps in their military history. Most of their detailed records only go back about 50 years. Hana waved dismissively. Every species cleans up their records before applying for council membership. Nobody wants their worst moments on display during the evaluation process. The Korthek hid their entire colonial period, and the Virians completely omitted their resource wars. It's perfectly normal. Still, something nagged at Minho as he prepared for sleep that night. He accessed the ship's database and began cross-referencing human military terminology. Some of the words in their older files seemed strange. References to something called World Wars appeared in fragments, but when he tried to access those files, they were marked as corrupted or incomplete. The next morning brought their arrival at Earth orbit. The planet hung before them like a blue and green jewel, more beautiful than any of the images had suggested. Minho could see the lights of human cities scattered across the dark side of the planet, forming intricate patterns that spoke of advanced civilization. "Contact established with Earth Control," announced the ship's communication officer. "They're directing us to Docking Station Harmony 7. As they approached the space station, Minho was impressed by its design. Clean lines, efficient layout, and obvious attention to both function and aesthetics. Human ships moved around the station in orderly patterns, each following precise flight paths that avoided any possibility of collision. "They certainly know how to organize traffic," Hana observed. "No wasted motion, no unnecessary risks." This level of coordination suggests a naturally disciplined mindset. The docking procedure went smoothly, and within hours they were being greeted by their human liaison. Colonel Park Ji-won was tall for his species, with short dark hair and intelligent brown eyes. He wore a crisp military uniform that somehow managed to look both professional and non-threatening. "Welcome to the Sol system," he said in accented but clear galactic standard. "We're honored to host representatives of the Council. I hope your journey was comfortable." "Very much so, Colonel," Hana replied. "We're eager to begin our observations. The preliminary reports about your military doctrine are quite promising." Park smiled, but Minho thought he detected a brief flicker of something else in the human's expression. Uncertainty, perhaps, or concern. It passed so quickly that Minho wondered if he had imagined it. "We've prepared a comprehensive tour of our training facilities and recent exercise footage," Park continued. "I think you'll find our approach to conflict resolution quite educational. We've worked hard to develop methods that achieve military objectives while maintaining our commitment to minimizing harm." As they walked through the station corridors, Minho noticed how other humans reacted to their group. Most smiled and nodded politely, but there was something in their eyes that he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't fear or hostility, but rather a kind of careful watchfulness, as if they were constantly evaluating potential threats. The corridors themselves were impressive in their efficiency. Every surface served a purpose, every design element contributed to function rather than mere decoration. Yet there was also something subtly unsettling about the architecture. The walls seemed thicker than necessary, the emergency systems more robust than other species typically required. "Your people certainly believe in building things to last," Minho commented to Park. The colonel paused for a moment before responding. "We've learned the value of durability in our construction methods. Sometimes conflicts can be more intense than initially expected." That evening, as Minho settled into his assigned quarters aboard the human station, he made his first personal log entry of the mission. Personal log, Day 1. "We have arrived at Earth and made contact with our human hosts. Initial impressions are very positive. The humans appear to have developed an admirably restrained approach to warfare that could serve as a model for other developing species." Colonel Park and his team seemed genuinely committed to minimizing casualties and achieving swift resolution of conflicts. However, I must note some inconsistencies in their historical records and what appears to be carefully managed presentation of their capabilities. This could simply be normal diplomatic caution, but I plan to investigate further. The humans' natural discipline and organizational abilities are impressive, perhaps more so than their preliminary report suggested. Tomorrow, we begin detailed observations of their military exercises. I'm optimistic that this mission will provide valuable insights for the Council's ongoing efforts to promote civilized conflict resolution across the galaxy. As Minho finished his log entry, he looked out through the small window of his quarters at the planet below. Earth turned slowly in the darkness, its cities glowing like scattered stars. Somewhere down there, humans were living their lives, working, building, and perhaps preparing for conflicts using their remarkably restrained methods. He had no idea that he was about to discover something that would change everything he thought he knew about warfare, civilization, and the true nature of the species that called that beautiful planet home. The human training facility impressed Minho from the moment he stepped inside. Everything was clean, organized, and purposeful. Soldiers moved through exercises with mechanical precision, their movements flowing like water around obstacles. Not a single motion was wasted. Not a single command needed to be repeated. Colonel Park led the Council delegation through a series of observation areas where they could watch human military units practice their techniques. Dr. Hana took detailed notes on her datapad, while Minho recorded everything with his portable scanner. This is Squad 7 practicing urban engagement protocols, Park explained as they watched a group of soldiers navigate through a mock city environment. The structures looked remarkably realistic, complete with civilian mannequins placed throughout the scenario. The squad moved through the area like ghosts. They identified targets, neutralized threats, and secured objectives without disturbing a single civilian mannequin. When they encountered enemy positions, they used precision strikes that disabled equipment rather than destroying everything in sight. Remarkable restraint, Hana murmured, making more notes. How do you train soldiers to maintain such discipline under pressure? Park smiled with what seemed like genuine pride. We select our military personnel carefully and provide extensive training in conflict de-escalation. Every soldier learns that the goal is resolution, not destruction. A new person joined their group as they moved to the next demonstration area. Lee Hyunwoo was introduced as the facility's military historian, a thin man with kind eyes and a slight nervous habit of adjusting his glasses. He carried a thick folder of documents and spoke with the careful precision of someone who had spent years studying complex subjects. I've prepared a comprehensive overview of our recent conflicts, Hyunwoo said, opening his folder. Each engagement demonstrates our commitment to minimizing casualties while achieving strategic objectives. The first case study involved a territorial dispute between two human nations. According to the records, the entire conflict lasted only 5 days and resulted in fewer than 300 casualties total. The resolution came through what humans called overwhelming precision, where one side demonstrated such superior tactical coordination that further resistance became pointless. Your casualty ratios are extraordinary, Minho said, studying the charts. How do you achieve such low numbers while still accomplishing your military goals? Advanced technology helps, Park replied. But more importantly, we've developed a culture that values efficiency over spectacle. Why destroy a city when you can disable its defenses and achieve the same strategic result? The next demonstration showed human soldiers practicing something called surgical strikes. They used weapons that could disable vehicles without harming the people inside, neutralize communication systems without destroying buildings, and create barriers without permanent environmental damage. Minho watched a soldier use a device that generated some kind of energy field. When activated, it made enemy weapons simply stop working, while leaving everything else untouched. The soldier explained that the effect was temporary and designed to encourage surrender rather than force continued fighting. This technology is remarkable, Hana said. How long did it take to develop these non-lethal alternatives? Hyunwoo consulted his folder. Most of our current systems were perfected within the last 50 years. We realized that traditional methods were becoming inefficient for our purposes. As they toured more areas of the facility, Minho began noticing small details that puzzled him. All the soldiers they met appeared young, probably in their 20s or early 30s. When he asked about veteran soldiers with longer service records, Park explained that their efficient conflict resolution meant most personnel didn't need extended combat experience. We pride ourselves on resolving disputes quickly, Park said. A soldier might see action only once or twice in their entire career. It's much better for everyone involved. But something about this explanation bothered Minho. In his studies of other species, veteran soldiers usually held important training positions or leadership roles. The absence of older, more experienced military personnel seemed unusual for a species that had been engaging in conflicts for presumably thousands of years. During a break in the tour, Minho found himself alone with Hyunwoo in a small observation room. He decided to ask some direct questions about human military history. Your records show very detailed information about recent conflicts, Minho said carefully. But I noticed that historical data becomes much less complete as you go back more than 50 years. Why is that? Hyunwoo shifted uncomfortably and adjusted his glasses. Well, record keeping wasn't always as standardized as it is now. Many older files were lost during various administrative reorganizations. Administrative reorganizations. Yes, we've restructured our military documentation system several times to improve efficiency. Some older records were deemed less relevant to current operations. Minho nodded, but he filed the response away as potentially significant. Species that had developed advanced military techniques usually preserved their historical lessons carefully. The gaps in human records seemed deliberate rather than accidental. That evening, back aboard their ship, Minho accessed the communication logs that their vessel automatically recorded during interplanetary travel. Most of the intercepted transmissions were routine commercial traffic, but buried in the data he found fragments of military communications that hadn't been included in the official materials. Park had shown them. One partial transmission mentioned something called Protocol 7 and included the phrase pre-council documentation standards. Another fragment referenced restricted memorial, access and sanitized demonstration materials. The transmissions were heavily encrypted, and only small portions had been decoded by their ship's systems. When Minho brought these findings to Dr. Hana, she initially seemed skeptical. "You're reading too much into routine military communications," she said. "Every species has classified information they don't share with outside observers. That's perfectly normal during evaluation periods. But why would they need to sanitize demonstration materials if their methods are as straightforward as they claim?" Hana paused in her review of the day's observations. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not sure yet," Minho admitted. "But I think there might be more to human military capabilities than what we're being shown. These communication fragments suggest they have historical records that are much more extensive than what they're sharing." The next morning brought another day of demonstrations, but Minho found himself paying closer attention to details that might have seemed insignificant before. He noticed that the training facilities had unusually thick walls and extremely robust construction. The emergency systems seemed designed for much more intense scenarios than the controlled exercises they were observing. During a demonstration of human logistics capabilities, Minho asked about supply chain management during extended conflicts. "Extended conflicts?" Park seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "Our doctrine emphasizes rapid resolution. We don't plan for extended engagements because they represent failure to achieve objectives efficiently." But when Minho examined the logistics systems more closely, he realized they were designed to support much larger forces for much longer periods than would be necessary for the brief conflicts in the official records. The infrastructure suggested preparation for scenarios that lasted months or even years, not days. Lee Hyunwoo noticed Minho's interest in the supply systems. "You seem fascinated by our logistical capabilities," he said with a nervous laugh. "They seem quite robust for conflicts that only last a few days." Minho replied. Hyunwoo's expression became uncomfortable. "Well, it's better to be overprepared than underprepared. We believe in building systems that can handle unexpected developments." That afternoon, while reviewing footage from the demonstrations, Minho made another discovery. Some of the soldiers' equipment bore manufacturing dates that were much older than the supposed age of their current military doctrine. Weapons and vehicles that should have been developed within the last 50 years showed production stamps from much earlier periods. When he mentioned this to Park, the colonel's explanation seemed rehearsed. "We often refurbish older equipment rather than building everything from scratch," Park said. "It's more economical and environmentally responsible. The core systems are updated even if the basic platforms are older." But Minho noticed that Park avoided eye contact while giving this explanation, and his voice carried a tension that hadn't been present during earlier conversations. As the second day ended, Minho realized that his initial excitement about human military innovation was being replaced by a growing sense that nothing was quite what it seemed. The humans were certainly demonstrating remarkable restraint and precision in their current operations, but the evidence suggested they were capable of much more than they were showing. In his personal log that evening, Minho recorded his growing concerns. Personal log, Day 2. Human military capabilities continue to impress in terms of precision and restraint. However, I'm beginning to suspect that we're seeing a carefully managed presentation rather than a complete picture of their abilities. Infrastructure, equipment age, and community. Minho couldn't sleep. The inconsistencies from the past 2 days kept spinning through his mind like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Finally giving up on rest, he made his way to the ship's communication center where the overnight monitoring systems continued their passive recording of local transmissions. The communication officer on duty was a young Cortec named Vex who had been trained to sort through intercepted signals. Most of what their systems picked up was civilian traffic, commercial broadcasts, and routine military communications. But buried in the data streams, Minho hoped to find something that might explain the gaps in human military history. "Anything unusual in tonight's intercepts?" Minho asked, settling into a chair beside Vex's workstation. "Nothing dramatic," Vex replied, his elongated fingers dancing across the control interface. "Although there was one encrypted military transmission about an hour ago that seemed different from the others." Vex pulled up the partially decoded transmission on his screen. Most of it was still encrypted, but a few phrases had been translated by their ship's linguistics programs. Minho felt his heart rate increase as he read the fragments. Protocol 7 implementation successful. Delegation showing appropriate responses to sanitized demonstrations. Recommend maintaining current presentation standards until evaluation complete. Another line made Minho's breath catch in his throat. Confirmed Terran War Memorial remains restricted access. Under no circumstances should Council observers gain access to pre-sanitation historical records. "Can you decode more of this transmission?" Minho asked urgently. Vex shook his head. "The encryption is military grade and uses patterns we haven't seen before. These fragments only came through because of minor transmission errors, but whoever sent this message definitely didn't want outside parties to understand it." Minho stared at the partial translation, a war memorial that was being kept secret from them. Pre-sanitation historical records. The implications were staggering. Everything they had been shown might be a carefully constructed performance designed to hide the true nature of human warfare. The next morning, Minho decided to confront Dr. Hana with his findings. He found her in the ship's analysis lab, reviewing footage from the previous day's demonstrations. "Dr. Hana, I need to show you something important," he said, displaying the intercepted transmission on a portable screen. Hana read the fragments twice before responding. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed from skeptical to deeply concerned. "If this translation is accurate, it suggests that everything we've observed has been staged for our benefit," she said slowly. "But why would humans go to such elaborate lengths to hide their true military capabilities?" "Maybe because their true capabilities are nothing like what we've been shown," Minho replied. "What if human warfare is actually much more intense and destructive than the civilized conflicts they've demonstrated?" Hana was quiet for several minutes, considering the implications. Finally, she made a decision that surprised Minho. "We need to investigate this directly. Tomorrow I'm going to ask Colonel Park about human military history that predates their current doctrine. If they're hiding something significant, his responses should give us more information." The next day's schedule included a visit to what Park had described as a strategic planning center where human military leaders coordinated their civilized conflict operations. The facility was impressive, filled with holographic displays and sophisticated communication systems that could coordinate forces across vast distances. Dr. Hana waited until they were in a private briefing room before asking her carefully prepared questions. "Colonel Park, we've been very impressed with your current military doctrine," she began, "but we're curious about how humans conducted warfare before developing these civilized conflict methods. What were your historical approaches to military engagement?" Park's reaction was immediate and telling. His relaxed demeanor shifted to something much more guarded, and Minho noticed his hands tense slightly before he responded. "Our historical methods were less refined," Park said carefully. "Like many developing species, we went through a period of learning through trial and error. The important thing is that we've moved beyond those primitive approaches. Could we see some examples of these historical conflicts?" Hana pressed. "Understanding the evolution of military thinking would be valuable for our report. Unfortunately, most of those records are stored in restricted archives," Park replied. "They're not readily accessible for external review. Besides, they wouldn't be relevant to evaluating our current capabilities." But Minho caught something in Park's tone that suggested the records weren't just restricted. They were being actively hidden. When humans said something wasn't readily accessible, they usually meant it could be made available with some effort. Park's phrasing suggested permanent unavailability. Lee Hyunwoo, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly spoke up with obvious nervousness. "Perhaps we could show them some of our historical literature instead," he suggested to Park. "Humans create many fictional stories about warfare. Those might give a general sense of our thinking without requiring access to classified military records." Park shot Hyunwoo a sharp look that clearly conveyed displeasure with the suggestion. But it was too late to retract the offer without seeming suspicious. "That's an interesting idea," Hana said quickly. "We'd be very interested in examining human military literature." Reluctantly, Park arranged for them to visit a civilian library facility where they could access human literary works. The selection Hyunwoo showed them was carefully chosen, but even the sanitized examples were revealing. The humans had created an enormous body of fictional work focused on warfare, but the conflicts described in their stories were vastly different from the civilized engagements they had demonstrated. Stories of massive battles involving millions of participants, weapons that could destroy entire cities, and conflicts that lasted for years or even decades. "These are quite imaginative," Minho commented, reading a story about something called a world war that supposedly involved entire continents. "Do humans often create fiction about such large-scale conflicts?" Hyunwoo shifted uncomfortably. "Humans have very active imaginations when it comes to hypothetical scenarios. These stories serve as cautionary tales, helping us understand why our current civilized methods are so much better." But as Minho read more examples, he began to notice consistent themes and details that seemed too specific and coherent to be pure imagination. The military terminology was precise, the strategic concepts were sophisticated, and the technological descriptions were internally consistent in ways that suggested actual knowledge, rather than creative speculation. "This story mentions specific battle locations and dates," Minho observed, showing Hyunwoo a passage about a place called Normandy and a date in human year 1944. "Are these fictional locations and times?" "Yes, completely fictional," Hyunwoo replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Human writers often create elaborate fictional histories to make their stories seem more realistic." Dr. Hana had been quietly reading through multiple examples of human military fiction. When she finally looked up, her expression was troubled. "The level of detail in these works is extraordinary," she said. "The descriptions of logistics, strategy, and technology are more sophisticated than most actual military manuals we've studied from other species. If these are truly works of imagination, humans have remarkable insight into large-scale warfare." That evening, back aboard their ship, Minho and Dr. Hana held a private conference to discuss their growing concerns. "The evidence is pointing toward a disturbing possibility," Hana said. "What if the civilized conflicts we've been observing aren't representative of how humans naturally conduct warfare? What if they represent a conscious effort to restrain their true capabilities?" Minho had reached the same conclusion. "The fiction we read today described conflicts on a scale that no species in the galaxy has ever attempted. If those stories are based on actual human history rather than pure imagination, it would explain why they're so determined to hide their historical records. But that would mean humanity has experience with warfare that makes every other species look peaceful by comparison," Hana said. "The casualty numbers described in some of those stories were larger than the entire populations of most council member worlds." They sat in silence for several minutes, contemplating the implications. If humans had actually conducted warfare on the scale described in their fiction, their current civilized conflict doctrine wasn't natural evolution. It was deliberate suppression of capabilities that could threaten the stability of the entire galaxy. "We need more information," Hana finally said. "Tomorrow I'm going to request access to whatever historical records they're willing to share. If they refuse or continue to provide obviously sanitized materials, we'll know our suspicions are correct." Minho nodded, but he was already planning to take more direct action. The ship's computer systems had been passively scanning all the human facilities they had visited. If there were hidden records or restricted databases, their ship's intelligence-gathering protocols might have detected traces of them. That night, while Dr. Hana slept, Minho accessed the ship's scanning logs and began searching for any data that might. Minho spent the entire night diving deeper into the scanning data their ship had collected. Each new fragment he discovered painted a more terrifying picture of human military history. By morning, he had assembled enough evidence to shatter everything the Council believed about humanity's civilized warfare doctrine. When Dr. Hana arrived at the analysis lab, she found Minho surrounded by holographic displays showing partial database entries, intercepted file fragments, and statistical analyses that made no sense according to everything they had been told. "I couldn't sleep either," she said, settling into a chair beside him. Show me what you found. Minho activated the main display, which showed a timeline of human military activities constructed from the fragments their ship's systems had passively collected from human networks. The scale was beyond anything either of them had imagined possible. These aren't complete records, Minho began, his voice strained from lack of sleep and the weight of his discoveries. But what we have suggests that human warfare historically operated on scales that dwarf anything else in recorded galactic history. The first set of data showed casualty, figures from conflicts that humans had apparently called world wars, single, battles that killed more beings in a day than most, species lost in decades of conflict, weapons that could destroy cities so completely that the land remained poisoned for generations. This can't be accurate, Hana said, studying the numbers. These casualty figures represent significant percentages of their total planetary population. No species could sustain losses like this and continue functioning. That's what I thought too, Minho replied. But look at this. He pulled up another display showing population recovery data. Humans didn't just survive these conflicts. They recovered and grew stronger. Their population actually increased during periods that should have devastated their civilization. The implications were staggering. Humanity had developed the ability to conduct warfare that would extinct most other species, then recover from the losses and continue advancing technologically and socially. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Minho activated a display showing fragments from something called the Nuclear Age Documentation Project. They developed weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds, he said quietly. Not just kill the inhabitants, but make the land uninhabitable for decades. And they built thousands of these weapons. Dr. Hana stared at the display in horror. The partial records described weapons with the power to crack continents, strategies for eliminating entire civilizations, and military doctrines based on the complete destruction of enemies rather than simple victory. This is impossible, she whispered. No species could develop this level of destructive capability without destroying themselves. The social and psychological stresses alone should have prevented such advancement. Minho pulled up the final set of data that had convinced him their initial assumptions were completely wrong. It was a partial file from what appeared to be a human military training manual, but the content was unlike anything they had seen during their official demonstrations. The manual discussed something called total war, where the objective wasn't military victory but the complete elimination of an enemy's ability to ever pose a threat again. It described strategies for destroying not just military forces but entire industrial bases, agricultural systems, and civilian populations. They call it strategic bombing, Minho said, his voice hollow with shock. The deliberate targeting of civilian populations to break enemy morale and destroy their capacity to support continued resistance, but perhaps most terrifying of all was a section discussing what humans called mutually assured destruction. The concept involved building enough destructive capability to guarantee that any enemy attack would result in the complete annihilation of both attacking and defending civilizations. They were prepared to destroy themselves rather than accept defeat, Hana said, struggling to process the information. This level of commitment to warfare is beyond anything we've encountered in galactic history. As they continued analyzing the data, a clearer picture emerged of what humanity's civilized conflict doctrine really represented. It wasn't how humans naturally conducted warfare. It was an artificial restraint system they had developed to suppress their true military capabilities. Look at this timeline, Minho said, highlighting key dates in the data. Their current civilized doctrine was implemented approximately 50 years ago, which corresponds exactly to when their historical military records become classified or disappear entirely. The evidence suggested that humans had consciously decided to abandon their natural approach to warfare and develop completely new methods that prioritized restraint over effectiveness. But they hadn't eliminated their capacity for more destructive approaches. They had simply chosen not to use them. This explains so much, Hana said, reviewing the data again. The over-engineered infrastructure we observed, the advanced logistics systems, the carefully managed presentations. They're not showing us their natural military culture. They're demonstrating their ability to restrain themselves. A new file fragment appeared on the display as their ship systems continued processing intercepted data. This one was particularly significant because it appeared to be from a recent human military planning document. Maintain Protocol 7 standards during council evaluation. All personnel are reminded that demonstration of pre-doctrine capabilities is strictly forbidden. The galaxy is not ready to understand the true nature of human warfare. Our acceptance depends on maintaining the illusion that civilized conflict represents our natural military evolution. The document continued with specific instructions for hiding historical records, restricting access to certain military facilities, and ensuring that all demonstrations remained within carefully defined parameters that would seem impressive, but not threatening to galactic observers. They know exactly what they're doing, Minho said. This isn't accidental concealment or diplomatic caution. It's a coordinated effort to hide their true capabilities from the entire galactic community. Dr. Hana was quiet for a long time, absorbing the full implications of their discovery. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of fear and something that might have been admiration. If these records are accurate, humanity possesses military capabilities that could threaten the stability of the entire galaxy, she said. But instead of using those capabilities for conquest or intimidation, they've chosen to develop methods that minimize harm and promote peaceful resolution of conflicts. Minho nodded, realizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had transcended its own nature through conscious choice rather than evolutionary pressure. The question is, what do we do with this information? He said. If we report the truth about human military capabilities, the Council might consider them too dangerous for membership. But if we report only what they've shown us, we're participating in their deception. Before Dr. Hana could respond, their ship's communication system activated with an incoming message from Colonel Park. His voice carried a tension that hadn't been present in their previous interactions. Dr. Hana, Mr. Minho, we need to meet urgently. There have been some developments that require immediate discussion. Please return to the station as soon as possible. After the communication ended, Minho and Hana looked at each other with the same thought. Somehow the humans had discovered that their deception had been uncovered. They know we know, Hana said simply. As they prepared to return to the human station, Minho realized that their mission had become something far more complex than a simple evaluation of military doctrine. They were about to confront a species that had achieved something remarkable and terrifying: the conscious suppression of their own capacity for unlimited destruction in favor of building a more civilized approach to conflict. The question was whether humanity's greatest achievement was their historical military prowess, or their decision to abandon it in favor of something better, and whether the galaxy was ready to accept a species that had made such a choice. Personal log, Day 4. Minho recorded as their shuttle prepared to dock with the human station. We have discovered that everything we believed about human military doctrine is fundamentally incorrect. Their civilized conflict methods represent not natural evolution, but conscious restraint of capabilities that exceed anything previously recorded in galactic history. We are about to confront them with our knowledge, and I suspect this conversation will determine not just humanity's future membership in the Council, but the future of galactic stability itself. As their shuttle approached the docking bay, Minho could see Colonel Park waiting for them with several other human military officers. Their expressions were serious, and Minho realized that the carefully maintained facade of the past few days was about to be permanently stripped away. The meeting room felt different this time. Gone were the comfortable chairs and casual atmosphere of their previous briefings. Colonel Park sat across from them at a metal table, flanked by two other human officers who had not been introduced. The walls displayed no welcoming images of human achievements, only blank panels that suggested this room was designed for difficult conversations. Dr. Hana, Mr. Minho, Park began, his voice carrying a formality that hadn't been present before. We're aware that your ship's scanning systems have been collecting data during your visit. This is normal protocol and we expected it. What concerns us is the specific nature of the information you've been accessing. Dr. Hana met Park's gaze directly. We've discovered that the military demonstrations you've provided don't represent the full scope of human warfare capabilities. We need to discuss the implications of this discovery. Park was silent for several moments, seeming to weigh his options. When he finally spoke, the careful diplomatic tone he had maintained for days was gone. What exactly do you think you've discovered? He asked. Minho activated his data pad and displayed some of the fragments their ship had collected. References to conflicts involving millions of casualties, weapons capable of destroying cities, and military doctrines focused on total destruction rather than civilized resolution. The two officers flanking Park exchanged glances, and one of them leaned forward to whisper something in his ear. Park nodded grimly before responding. "Those records are classified for good reason," he said. "They represent a period of human history that we've moved beyond. They're not relevant to our current capabilities or intentions, but they are relevant to understanding what you're truly capable of," Dr. Hana replied. "The civilized conflict doctrine you've demonstrated appears to be a conscious restraint of much more destructive abilities." Park stood and walked to one of the blank wall panels. He placed his hand on what appeared to be a biometric scanner, and the panel changed to display what looked like a complex access menu. "There's something we need to show you," he said, his voice heavy with reluctance. "But before we proceed, I need you both to understand that what you're about to see is restricted information that could fundamentally alter the galaxy's perception of humanity." He turned back to face them, and Minho was struck by the weight of responsibility he saw in the colonel's eyes. "We call it the Terran War Memorial," Park continued. "It's a comprehensive database of human military history, from our earliest recorded conflicts to the implementation of our current civilized doctrine. We've kept it classified because we believe the galaxy isn't ready to understand what it contains." The wall display activated, showing the entrance to what appeared to be a vast digital archive. Categories were listed in human script, but Minho's translation device rendered them in standard galactic text. The scope was staggering. Ancient conflicts, classical warfare, medieval campaigns, industrial wars, world wars, nuclear age, and finally, doctrine transition. "How far back do these records go?" Dr. Hana asked. "Approximately 12,000 years," Park replied. "From the first organized battles between human tribes to the last traditional conflict before we adopted civilized warfare protocols." Lee Hyunwoo entered the room, carrying what appeared to be additional data storage devices. His usual nervous demeanor was replaced by something approaching resignation. "I've prepared the statistical overview," he said to Park. "If they're going to see the truth, they should understand the complete scope." Park activated the first section of the memorial database. What appeared on the display made both council observers step backward in shock. The casualty figures for what humans called their ancient period already exceeded the total warfare deaths of most galactic civilizations throughout their entire histories. "These numbers can't be accurate," Minho said, staring at records showing individual battles with casualty counts in the tens of thousands. "Your species should have gone extinct with losses like these." "Humans are remarkably resilient," Hyunwoo said quietly, "and we reproduce quickly compared to most galactic species. What would be extinction-level losses for others were merely setbacks for us. But the ancient conflicts were nothing compared to what came later." The section labeled World Wars contained data that defied comprehension. Single conflicts that lasted for years and involved entire continents, weapons that killed millions, strategies designed not just to defeat enemies but to eliminate their capacity to ever recover. World War II alone resulted in over 70 million deaths, Park said, his voice hollow. "That's larger than the current population of most council member worlds." The display showed images of the aftermath of human conflicts. Cities reduced to rubble that stretched beyond the horizon. Landscapes so devastated they looked like alien worlds. Populations displaced by the tens of millions. "But this is just conventional warfare," Park continued. "The truly terrifying developments came later." He activated the nuclear age section of the database. What appeared on the screen made Dr. Hana gasp audibly. Weapons capable of destroying entire cities in seconds. Military strategies based on the assumption that conflicts could end with the complete elimination of opposing civilizations. At the height of what we called the Cold War, humanity possessed enough nuclear weapons to destroy all life on our planet several times over, Park explained. Multiple nations maintained arsenals capable of rendering Earth uninhabitable for generations. Minho studied the technical specifications of the weapons described in the database. "These aren't theoretical designs," he said. "You actually built these devices." "Over 60,000 nuclear weapons at peak deployment," Hyunwoo confirmed. "Each one capable of destroying a city. Many were hundreds of times more powerful than the weapons that ended World War II. But perhaps most disturbing was the strategic doctrine that had developed around these weapons. Humans had created elaborate plans for what they called mutually assured destruction, where any attack would result in counterattacks that would eliminate both aggressor and defender. You were prepared to commit species suicide, rather than accept defeat, Dr. Hana said, struggling to process the concept. It seemed logical at the time, Park replied. If we couldn't prevent our enemies from destroying us, we could at least guarantee that they wouldn't survive their victory. The final section of the database was labeled Doctrine Transition, and it contained information that put everything else into perspective. 50 years ago, humanity had made a conscious decision to abandon their traditional approach to warfare and develop completely new methods based on restraint and minimal casualties. Why? Mignot asked. Why give up these capabilities when they clearly gave you enormous advantages? Park was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because we realized that our traditional methods would make us unwelcome in galactic civilization. No species would ally with us if they knew we were capable of the conflicts documented in this memorial. But more than that, Hyunwoo added, we realized that our capacity for destruction had become a threat to our own existence. We needed to develop better ways of resolving conflicts, not just for the galaxy's sake, but for our own survival. Dr. Hana reviewed the transition documentation, which showed the enormous effort humans had invested in developing their civilized conflict doctrine. It wasn't a natural evolution of their military thinking. It was a complete philosophical reversal that required retraining their entire military establishment. Every soldier in our current military has been trained not just in how to fight, but in how to hold back, Park explained. The restraint you've observed isn't natural to us. It's a skill we've had to develop through constant practice and discipline. The room fell silent as the full implications became clear. The civilized conflicts they had observed weren't examples of how humans naturally conducted warfare. They were demonstrations of humanity's ability to suppress their true military nature in favor of something the galaxy could accept. The weapons we showed you, the surgical strikes, the minimal casualties, Park continued, all of that represents us operating at less than 1% of our historical capability. Every engagement you've witnessed has been humanity choosing restraint over effectiveness. Minho realized that what they had mistaken for natural military evolution was actually one of the most remarkable achievements in galactic history. An entire species had consciously decided to fight against their own nature in pursuit of civilized behavior. But why continue to hide this? Dr. Hana asked. Your achievement in developing restraint is extraordinary. Surely the Council would recognize the value of a species that has transcended its violent origins. Lee Hyunwoo laughed bitterly. Would they? Look at your own reactions to these records. You're horrified by what we were capable of. Now imagine how the Council would respond to learning that every human soldier has been trained in methods that could devastate entire star systems. Park activated another section of the database labeled Psychological Profiles. The data showed that humanity's capacity for extreme warfare wasn't limited to a few individuals or specialized military units. It was a species-wide trait that required constant management. Every human has the potential for the kind of warfare documented in our historical records, Park said. We don't train soldiers to be killers. The journey back to their ship felt different this time. Minho and Dr. Hana walked through the corridors of the human station in complete silence, both struggling to process the magnitude of what they had learned. Every human they passed now looked different to them. Behind each polite smile and friendly nod was a being capable of warfare that exceeded galactic comprehension. Once they were safely aboard their own vessel, Dr. Hana called for an immediate private conference in the ship's secure communication room. The weight of their decision hung heavily in the air between them. We have to discuss our options, she said, settling into her chair with visible exhaustion. What we report back to the Council will determine not just humanity's future, but potentially the stability of the entire galaxy. Minho activated the room's privacy shields and pulled up their accumulated data on the main display. Weeks of careful observations, intercepted communications, and shocking revelations painted a picture that no one at Council headquarters would be prepared to understand. We have 3 choices, he said, organizing his thoughts. We can report exactly what humanity showed us and recommend them for membership based on their civilized conflict doctrine. We can report the truth about their capabilities and let the Council decide whether they're too dangerous to accept. Or we can recommend against membership without revealing the full scope of what we've discovered. Dr. Hanna studied the data displays showing both the sanitized demonstrations they had witnessed and the horrifying historical records from the Terran War Memorial. The contrast was so extreme it seemed impossible that both could represent the same species. If we report only their civilized capabilities, we're participating in their deception, she said. But if we report their true military history, we might condemn them to permanent isolation or worse. The thought of worse hung between them unspoken. If the Council decided that humanity posed too great a threat, the standard response was preventive action. Trade embargoes, technology restrictions, or in extreme cases, military containment. The irony was that such measures might force humanity to abandon their voluntary restraint and revert to their historical warfare methods. There's something else we need to consider, Minho said, pulling up the psychological profiles from the human database. Colonel Park was right about one thing. Our own reactions to their capabilities prove that the galaxy isn't ready to accept this level of military potential, even if it's being voluntarily restrained. Dr. Hanna nodded grimly. She had reviewed the data dozens of times, and each reading only reinforced her initial horror at the scope of human warfare capabilities. The casualty figures from their historical conflicts represented percentages of planetary population that would extinct most known species. But we also have to consider what we've actually observed, she said. Humanity has spent 50 years developing and maintaining a doctrine of restraint that goes against their natural inclinations. That level of self-control is unprecedented in galactic history. Minho accessed his personal logs from the past week, reviewing his own evolution from excitement to suspicion to horror and finally to something approaching awe. When I first arrived, I thought we were studying an advanced military doctrine. Now I realize we've been witnessing the greatest act of self-restraint in recorded galactic history. The communication system activated with an incoming message from Council. Headquarters, Dr. Hanna's supervisor wanted a preliminary report on their findings and an estimate of when they would submit their final evaluation. We can't delay much longer, she said after responding with a request for additional time. The Council is expecting recommendations within the next few days. As they continued their discussion, Minho found himself returning to something Colonel Park had said during their final meeting. The civilized conflict doctrine wasn't just about hiding humanity's capabilities from the galaxy. It was about humanity learning to be better than their nature demanded. I keep thinking about what restraint really means, he said. Most species develop peaceful behaviors because they're forced to, by environmental pressure or evolutionary necessity. Humans chose peace despite having every advantage that comes from superior warfare capabilities. Dr. Hanna pulled up comparative data from other Council member species. Even the most militarily advanced civilizations in the galaxy operated with weapons and strategies that seemed primitive compared to what humans had developed thousands of years ago. If we report their true capabilities, the Council will want to know why we're recommending them for membership, she said. How do we explain that a species with the capacity to devastate star systems should be trusted as an ally? Maybe we focus on what they've chosen not to do rather than what they could do, Minho suggested. Their restraint is more impressive than their capabilities. But even as he said it, he realized the difficulty of making such an argument to Council leadership. Military committees evaluated species based on their potential contributions and threats. A species that voluntarily limited their military effectiveness would be seen as either weak or deceptive. The next morning brought an unexpected communication from Colonel Park. He was requesting a final meeting before they departed, claiming to have additional information that might influence their report. When they returned to the human station, they found Park waiting with Lee Hyunwoo and several other humans they hadn't met before. The atmosphere was formal but not hostile. Dr. Hanna, Mr. Minho, Park began. We wanted to provide you with some additional context before you finalize your evaluation. We've been monitoring galactic communications, and we're aware that other Council members have been discussing humanity's application. He activated a display showing intercepted communications between various Council member worlds. The messages revealed that several civilizations were already suspicious of humanity's military claims and were pushing for more intensive evaluation procedures. The Korthek Military Command believes that any species capable of interstellar travel must possess more destructive capabilities than we've demonstrated. Park explained. They're recommending that the Council demand access to our complete military archives. Dr. Hana realized the implications immediately. If the Council forces you to reveal your historical records, the reaction will be much more hostile than if you provide them voluntarily through our report. Exactly, Park confirmed. We're asking you to help us control how this information is revealed. Your report can provide context and explanation that won't be possible if our capabilities are discovered through forced disclosure. Lee Hyunwoo stepped forward with a data storage device. We've prepared a complete summary of our military transition, including detailed analysis of how we maintain restraint and why we believe our civilized doctrine is sustainable long-term. The device contained documentation of humanity's psychological conditioning programs, their military education reforms, and their ongoing monitoring systems designed to prevent reversion to historical warfare methods. We want the Council to understand that our restraint isn't temporary or fragile, Park said. It's a fundamental change in human military culture that we've spent decades developing and implementing. As they reviewed the additional documentation, Minho began to see a path forward that might serve everyone's interests. What if we recommend a probationary membership? He suggested. Full Council acceptance contingent on continued adherence to civilized conflict protocols, with regular monitoring and evaluation. Dr. Hana considered the proposal. It would allow humanity to join galactic civilization while providing safeguards against any potential reversion to their historical warfare methods. The Council has never implemented long-term monitoring for member species, she said, but given the unique circumstances, they might accept it as a compromise. Park and his team discussed the proposal among themselves before responding. The idea of permanent monitoring was clearly not ideal from their perspective, but it was better than rejection or forced isolation. If monitoring is the price of acceptance, we're willing to pay it, Park finally said. We believe that once the galaxy sees our commitment to civilized behavior over time, the restrictions can eventually be lifted. That evening, as they prepared their final report, Minho and Dr. Hana crafted a document that would change galactic civilization forever. They described humanity's historical military capabilities honestly, but emphasized the remarkable achievement represented by their voluntary restraint. Bottom line assessment, Dr. Hana dictated as Minho recorded their conclusions. Humanity possesses military capabilities that exceed any species in current Council membership by several orders of magnitude. However, they have demonstrated sustained commitment to voluntary restraint and civilized conflict resolution for over 50 years. Their current military doctrine prioritizes minimal casualties and swift resolution over tactical advantage or territorial gain. Recommendation, Minho continued, accept humanity for probationary council membership with mandatory monitoring of military activities and regular evaluation of their continued adherence to civilized conflict protocols. Humanity's combination of capability and restraint makes them potentially valuable allies, provided their commitment to peaceful behavior can be verified and maintained. As they transmitted their report to Council headquarters,